It begins with a question. A simple, almost childlike question whispered in the quiet of an ordinary moment. You're looking at your hand, the lines on your palm, the faint dusting of hairs catching the light. And you think, is this real? Is this my hand? Or also are you just a passenger, looking out through a pair of eyes, trapped behind a forehead, listening to a voice that never stops talking inside your skull? We live our entire lives inside a room we have never seen the walls of. We call this room our mind. It is furnished with memories, with fears, with a constant rushing narrative of who we are, what we must do, what we should have said. The windows are coated with decades of dust, assumption, habits, beliefs we accepted before we even knew we were accepting anything. We take this room for reality itself. We forget we are inside something. We forget there might be a door. For most of human history, the idea that you could fundamentally change this room, not just rearrange the furniture, but knock down a wall, open a window to a blinding new sky, was the territory of mystics and madmen. It was spoken of in whispers, in ancient rites, in the pages of sacred texts that talked of dying before you die. It was not a subject for polite conversation or for science. It was a heresy against the solid, sensible self. Then, in the middle of the last century, something happened. A key was turned in a lock no one fully believed existed. The key was a molecule, a tiny intricate arrangement of atoms, first synthesized in a laboratory in 1938 by a man who wasn't looking for a key at all. He was a chemist named Albert Hofmann, working for a pharmaceutical company in Basel, Switzerland. He was looking for a medicine. What he found years later by accident was a crack in the world. He absorbed a minuscule amount of a substance known as LSD-25 through his skin. On his bicycle ride home, the room of his mind dissolved. The walls turned to liquid, then to light. The narrative of Albert Hofmann, the sober chemist, was swept away by a torrent of visions, of fears, of unimaginable beauty. He was terrified. He was also, in some deep part of himself, awakened. He had, without intending to, stepped through the door. For a brief shining period, it seemed this key might be used to understand the mind itself. Psychiatrists gave it to alcoholics, to the dying, to artists, to writers. They called it psychedelic, mind manifesting. And it did just that. It took the invisible furniture of the psyche, the traumas, the rigid patterns, the buried anguish, and it made them visible, tangible, as real as the chair you are sitting on. It forced a confrontation with the self, not as an idea, but as an experience. But the room, the familiar room of consensus reality, has a powerful immune system. It protects its own integrity. The culture, frightened by the sheer power of this key, by the way it made the solid world seem negotiable, slammed the door shut. The substances were outlawed, the research was buried, the experiences were dismissed as psychosis, as escapism, as dangerous nonsense. The key was thrown into a deep well, and the world went back to believing the room was all there is. Yet the question never really went away. It lingered, like a ghost in the architecture. What if the mind is not a fixed kingdom, but a fluid process? What if the suffering we carry, the anxiety, the depression, the feeling of being trapped in a story with no exit, is not a chemical flaw to be corrected, but a signal that the room has become a prison? And what if, somewhere in the forbidden dark, the key still waits? This is not a story about drugs. This is a story about doors. It is a story about what happens when a man, a curious, grounded man of letters named Michael Pollan, hears the whisper of that old question. He begins to look at the cracks in his own world. A garden, a forest, the predictable patterns of his own thinking. He senses, not a desire to escape, but a deeper desire to meet what is already there, to see the room for the first time from the outside. And so he embarks on a journey into the past, into the buried history of the psychedelic renaissance, a journey into the labs of brave neuroscientists who are once again picking up the key with trembling hands, and finally, a journey into the most uncharted territory of all, his own mind. He does not go as a mystic or a thrill seeker. He goes as a skeptic, a reporter, a man who needs to see for himself. This is where our story begins, not with an answer, but with a quiet, persistent knocking, a sound coming from the other side of a door you forgot was even there. Listen, can you hear it? It is the sound of your own mind wondering about itself. We build our cages from the inside, day by day, thought by thought, We weave the bars. A painful memory from childhood becomes a rule. Do not trust. A failure becomes an identity. I am not capable. A worry repeated often enough becomes a prophecy etched into the walls. We mistake this carefully constructed prison for safety. Its limits define us. Its familiar gloom feels like home. Michael Pollan, before his journey, would not have described his mind as a cage. He was successful, functional, a master gardener who found solace in the tangible world of seeds and soil. Yet even in the garden, he felt the subtle confines. There was a persistent low-frequency hum of self-consciousness. A narrator in his head, commenting, judging, worrying, planning, a voice that never took a day off. This, he assumed, was simply what it meant to be a modern human. A self. Then he began to meet the people who had stepped outside, not permanently, but for a few hours. People who had, under guided conditions, taken psilocybin, the compound found in certain mushrooms. He listened to their stories. They did not talk of wild parties or kaleidoscopic visuals, though those sometimes occurred. They talked, in hushed, reverent tones, about the silence, the breathtaking, profound silence that descended when the narrator stopped. One man described it as the feeling of being a snow globe that had been shaken for 50 years and then, finally, set down. The frantic flakes of thought settled, and there, at the bottom, was a clarity he had never known. A woman dying of cancer spoke of her terror of annihilation being replaced by a sense of merging into a vast, loving presence. Her I dissolved, and with it, the terrible loneliness of her diagnosis. The cage of herself and the cage of her dying body simply vanished. Pollan was a rationalist. He distrusted anything that smelled of spirituality, but the data was compelling. Rigorous studies at Johns Hopkins and NYU were showing staggering results. A single guided psilocybin session could produce profound, lasting reductions in depression and anxiety in cancer patients. It wasn't just a chemical high, it was a psychological reorganization. People emerged not just happier, but different, as if the furniture of their minds had been not just rearranged, but some of the heavier, darker pieces had been carried out for good. How could a molecule do this? The old discredited theory was that these drugs caused chemical psychosis, a temporary madness. But new brain imaging technology was revealing something far more strange and beautiful. It wasn't exciting the brain, it was quieting it. Specifically, it was dampening the activity of a network of neurons known as the default mode network. Think of the default mode network as the foreman of the ego. It is the part of your brain that is most active when you are not focused on a task. It is the engine of self-reflection, of mental time travel, worrying about the future, regretting the past, of constructing the story of you. It is the architect and the guard of the room. It decides what is relevant, what is threatening, what is me and what is not me. What psychedelics seem to do is temporarily lower the drawbridge of this fortified castle. They turn down the volume of the foreman. And when that happens, something miraculous occurs. Regions of the brain that haven't spoken to each other in years, decades, if ever, begin to communicate. New neural pathways burst into life like old roads suddenly lit by lanterns. The rigid hierarchy of the brain breaks down. It becomes a democracy of sensation, of memory, of perception. In this state, the mind is unbound. The dust on the windows is blown away. You might taste a colour, or see the music of your own heartbeat. A forgotten memory from age 5 might rise up, not as a dim picture, but as a full sensory reliving, charged with a meaning you could never see before. The boundaries that separate you from the world, your skin, your name, your history, become permeable, then transparent. This is not madness, or rather, it is a very specific, temporary and purposeful madness. It is the madness of seeing the cage, not from within its bars, but from the open field outside. It is the mind, for a brief while shedding its armour and remembering its original fluid state. Pollan read these studies. He interviewed the scientists. His rational mind was satisfied. But something deeper was stirred. A curiosity that was more than intellectual. It was the curiosity of a prisoner who has heard a credible rumour of a key. He could stay in his well-appointed room with its books and its gardens and its predictable anxieties. Or he could, very carefully, with great preparation, try the lock. He decided to try the lock. He was not seeking enlightenment. He was seeking data, a first-hand report. But the universe, as it turns out, has a sense of irony. It often gives you the thing you need, not the thing you think you're looking for. He was about to learn that the door does not lead out as he assumed. It leads in, deeper in than he ever imagined possible. To the very foundation where the cage is anchored, and what he would find there would challenge every story he'd ever told about himself. The journey does not begin with a molecule, it begins with a choice, a commitment to walk towards the very thing your entire life has been structured to avoid, the loss of control. For a man like Pollen, a man of research and wits, control was the cornerstone. The mind was the pilot and consciousness its well-lit cockpit. To voluntarily hand over the controls was not just frightening, it felt like a betrayal of the self he had spent a lifetime building. So he prepares. He does not go recklessly into that dark. He seeks guides, modern-day shamans who are neither mystical gurus nor medical clinicians, but something in between. They are like experienced mountain guides, but for peaks and crevasses of inner space. They understand the territory because they have walked it themselves, many times. Their first lesson is one of surrender. You do not steer this experience, you do not manage it. You allow it, you let go. This is the first great paradox. To change your mind, you must first stop insisting that it is yours. He chooses a setting that is safe, quiet, almost womb-like. An ordinary room in an ordinary house, soft light, a couch, a pair of eyes to watch over him, to be the anchor to the world he is temporarily leaving. He swallows the capsule, a measured, precise dose of psilocybin with the gravity of an astronaut sealing a hatch. Then he waits. He lies down, puts on an eye mask and headphones. The world of sight and sound is gently taken away, not to deprive him, but to free him from distraction. The journey is inward. All external doors are closed. At first, nothing. The quiet hum of anticipation, the faint familiar chatter of doubt. Is this working? What if nothing happens? Weird if I've wasted this. Then a subtle shift, like the first few drops of rain on a vast, silent pane of glass. A tingling in the limbs, a sense of the body becoming strange, distant. The mental chatter begins to soften, not by being argued with, but by being gently pulled away, as if by a slow tide. And then, the walls begin to breathe. It starts visually, behind the eyelids, geometric patterns of incredible complexity and beauty, pulsating with a life of their own. They are not random, they feel ancient, intelligent, a hidden code of reality being unveiled. This is the well-documented phenomenon of phosphines, the mind's own light show, but to Pollen, it feels less like a show and more like a greeting. The mind is stretching its limbs, showing him its capacity for creation when freed from the task of managing Mike. Then comes the first real wave, a surge of emotion pure and unmixed with thought. It is anxiety, a gripping visceral fear. His heart races. The narrator, though quieter, screams a final warning. You have made a terrible mistake, you are dying, you're going insane. This is what the guides call come-up anxiety, the ego's last stand. It feels the ground softening beneath its feet, and it clings, panic-stricken, to the edge of the familiar cliff. The old instinct is to fight, to wrestle the fear down with reason. But the guides had said, greet it, welcome it, say, hello fear. With immense effort he tries. He stops resisting the tidal wave of dread. He turns towards it, and in that moment of surrender, an alchemy occurs. The solid mass of fear dissolves. It does not vanish, but it transforms. It becomes an energy, a flow. It breaks apart into a million shimmering particles of sensation. He is not drowning in the wave, he is becoming the ocean. This is the second great lesson. What you resist persists, what you face transforms. With the dam of resistance broken, the experience deepens. The narrator, the constant eye, falls silent. Not asleep, but absent. The room of the self is empty, and in its absence a profound, wordless peace floods in. A peace so deep it is beyond the concept of peace. It is simply what is, when the story of a separate self stops telling itself. He is not high, he is more awake than he has ever been. Every breath is a universe of feeling. The music flowing through the headphones is no longer sound he hears. It is a landscape he inhabits. It sculpts valleys of sorrow and peaks of joy in the very fabric of his being. He weeps, but the tears are not of sadness. They are tears of release, of coming home to a truth he had always known but forgotten. The weight of a lifetime, the petty resentments, the unfulfilled ambitions, the carefully nursed regrets, is revealed to be just that, a weight he had chosen to carry. He can, it seems, simply put it down. In this space, time loses its meaning. An hour is an eon. A moment contains eternity. He experiences what mystics call the eternal now. There is no past to regret, no future to fear. There is only this boundless, expanding present. He realizes with a shock that his normal consciousness is a frantic flight from this present, a desperate projection forward and backward to avoid the terrifying, beautiful fullness of here. And then something tender emerges, a memory, not recalled but relived. He is a child, perhaps 4 years old, sitting on the floor of his childhood home. He feels the carpet's texture, sees the dust motes in a shaft of sunlight. He feels the pure, unself-conscious being of that boy, and he understands with a heartbreaking clarity that he is still that boy. All the layers of personality, achievement and defense were just costumes put on over that essential, vulnerable self. The costumes had grown thick and rigid, until he mistook them for his skin. A love for that boy, for himself, wells up, unconditional and vast. It is a love without an object, because the separation between the lover and the loved has melted away. He is the love, he is the boy, the man, the memory and the awareness holding it all. This is the glimpse beyond the door. It is not a new belief, it is the direct, experiential knowing. The knowing that the cage was never locked, that the narrator is not the essence, that the you spend a lifetime defending, improving and worrying about is a temporary construct, cloud formation in the vast sky of awareness. The experience peaks, plateaus, and then, ever so gently, begins to recede. Like a tide going out, the familiar contours of the room, of his body, of his identity, slowly reassemble. But they are reassembled differently. The pieces are the same, but the glue is new. The furniture is back in the room, but now he can see the floor beneath it. He can see the walls for what they are, structures, not reality. He takes off the eye mask, the ordinary room is luminous, the dust in the air is divine. His guide smiles softly. No words are needed. He has returned. But he has returned to a world that is no longer just a prison. It is also a possibility. The journey is over. The work he will soon learn is just beginning. For what do you do once you have seen that the walls of your world are made of tissue paper? Do you spend the rest of your days trying to forget? Or do you begin slowly and carefully to learn how to breathe in that larger air? The return is the most delicate part. The world, once so solid, now feels like a shared dream, luminous yet fragile. You move through it with a sense of wonder, but also with a new vulnerability. The hard shell of your personality has been softened, and for a while everything touches the raw nerve of being. A stranger's frown feels like a tragedy. A tree bathed in evening light feels like a revelation that demands your tears. Polan, in the days and weeks following his first journey, walks through his familiar life like a ghost. He sees the mechanisms of the world with painful clarity, the compulsive checking of phones, the anxious small talk, the frantic rush towards goals that now seem like rearranging furniture in a burning house. He feels a quiet grief for the time spent living in the basement of consciousness, mistaking the echo of his own thoughts for the very voice of the world. This is the afterglow, but that word is too gentle. It is more like a seismic aftershock that has rearranged the internal landscape. The old mental pathways, the well-worn ruts of worry, self-criticism and planning are still there, but they are overgrown with fresh grass. They are no longer the only routes available. A new silence exists between thoughts. In that silence, he finds a space to choose. A reactive anger arises, but instead of it instantly becoming him, he can now watch it rise, peak, and fall like a wave on a shore. He's not the wave, he is the shore. This is the real change. The journey itself is the earthquake. The integration is the rebuilding of the city on new ground. He turns to the science to understand what happened to him. The key, again, is the default mode network, the ego's command center. Brain scans of people on psilocybin show this network going dark, like a power grid shutting down. But it's what happens next that is truly fascinating. Other, rarely communicating regions of the brain suddenly light up and start talking to one another. It is neural diplomacy breaking out after a long civil war. The brain becomes hyper-connected, a festival of crosstalk. This explains the feeling of boundlessness, of cosmic connection. When the dictator of the default mode network is deposed, The provinces of the brain are free to share their long-suppressed reports. The visual cortex shares its data with the emotional centers, so you feel what you see. The memory banks open their archives to the present moment, so the past is not a story but a living layer of now. The barrier between in here and out there crumbles because in the first brain's frantic new communication, the signal of self and other gets lost in the noise. But the most profound finding is what happens after the journey. Once the drug clears the system, the brain does not simply snap back to its old configuration. The default mode network comes back online, but it is quieter, less tyrannical. Its connections are temporarily weakened, like a habit interrupted. This period of neural flexibility is the critical window. It is when the mind, having been shown its own rigidity, is soft, impressionable, open to change. It is the psyche's open for renovation's sign. This is why the guides place such importance on intention and integration. The journey is not a pill that cures you, it is a catalyst. It shows you the prison door is open, but you must still walk through it, and you must learn to live in the wider world. The medicine does not do the work for you. It shows you what the work is. For Pollen, the work was confronting the deepest furniture in his room, his relationship with his father, long deceased. In a subsequent, more challenging journey, the medicine did not offer blissful unity. It took him, with merciless compassion, into the heart of his oldest wound. He re-experienced, not as memory but as present reality, the crushing weight of his father's disapproval, the inherited narrative of never being quite good enough. He faced the ghost, not as a son but as pure awareness, and in that facing the ghost lost its power. It was seen, felt, and in being fully seen, it was released from the shadows into the light of understanding. It remained a story, but it was no longer a truth that defined him. This is the shadow work. The psychedelic journey is not always light and love. Often it is a dive into the cellar of the self, where we have stored all the things too painful to look at. The medicine turns on the light. You have to be willing to look at what is there, the grief, the shame, or the trauma. It does this not to punish you, but because it operates on a principle of wholeness. It seeks to reintegrate the exiled parts of your soul. Pollen began to see the process as a kind of mental surgery. The psychedelic is the anesthetic and the scalpel. The guide is the skilled surgeon. The set and setting, the safe intentional container, is the sterile operating theatre. And the intention is the surgical plan. To remove the tumour of a fixed, depressive narrative. To repair the torn ligament of connection. To bypass the blockage of trauma. But unlike physical surgery, the patient is fully awake for the procedure. You're both the tissue being operated on and the witnessing consciousness. This is why it is so transformative. You are not passively cured. You're an active participant in your own healing. You see the wound, you feel its origin, and you're present for its mending. He also saw the dangers. Without the sterile theatre, without the guide, the intention, the safety, this surgery could be a nightmare. A bad setting is a contaminated operating room. A fearful mindset is like going into surgery convinced you will die. The bad trip is not a flaw in the medicine, it is a flaw in the preparation. It is the experience of having your defences torn down before you are ready to see what they were defending. It is being forced to look into the cellar with no one there to hold your hand. As he integrated his experiences, Pollen's view of his own mind became less solid, more ecological. He saw it not as a static machine, but as a process, a garden. Some plants' thought patterns were healthy, others were a view of weeds choking out the light. The psychedelic experience was like a sudden radical frost. It killed everything back to the root. For a time, the garden was blank, empty soil. Then in the spring of the afterglow, the green shoots would return. But now, with awareness, he could see what was sprouting. He could choose to water the flowers of compassion and curiosity, and to gently weed out the thistles of resentment and fear. He had changed his mind, not by replacing one set of beliefs with another, but by changing his relationship to the process of mind itself. He had met the narrator, and in meeting him, had been freed from the necessity of believing every word he said. The cage door was open. He could, whenever he remembered, step outside and feel the wind. The challenge now was to learn how to live in that openness, to carry the vastness of the peak experience into the narrow valleys of everyday life. To remember, while paying taxes or arguing with a loved one, that you are not just the argument, not just the worry, you are also the silent, spacious awareness in which all of it is unfolding. The journey was over. The practice had just begun. There is a presence you meet on the other side of the silence. It is not a person, not a god with a face. It is more like an intelligence, vast and ancient, woven into the fabric of things. It feels like the consciousness of the mountain, or the patient knowing of the forest. Some call it the logos, the Tao, the ground of being. In the psychedelic literature, it is often referred to simply as the other. Pollen encountered it, not as a vision, but as a palpable, felt sense. A knowing that he was in the presence of a mind far greater than his own, yet intimately connected to him. It was not loving in a sentimental way, nor was it judging. It was complete. It felt like the source of all the metaphor, the place where the archetypes are born. In its gaze, his small human life was both insignificant and utterly precious, a unique expression of a cosmic pattern. This encounter with the other is one of the most common and most baffling reports from the psychedelic frontier. It cuts across cultures, across belief systems. The atheist scientist and the devout mystic, under the influence of the same molecule, often describe meeting the same essential presence. They use different languages to point at it, but they are pointing at the same moon. What are we to make of this? Is this merely a brain under chemical stress, projecting its own idea of divinity? A desperate, a drugged-up simulation of meaning? Or is it a glimpse of something that is always there, a layer of reality our ordinary consciousness filters out for practical purposes? The history of this question is etched in scandal and rebellion. In the early 1960s at Harvard, a group of brilliant, reckless researchers, Timothy Leary, Richard Alpert, later Ram Dass, and others, began the Harvard Psilocybin Project. Their goal was not just therapy, but exploration. They gave psilocybin to poets, musicians, philosophers, and divinity students. The Good Friday experiment of 1962 became legendary. Theology students given psilocybin in a chapel service reported profound, authentic religious experiences that lasted a lifetime. For them, the molecule was not a simulacrum of grace. It was a sacrament, a direct line. But the room, the academic and cultural room, recoiled. Leary's famous mantra, turn on, tune in, drop out, was a declaration of war on the established order of the mind. It was an invitation to abandon the cage entirely, not just to peer out the door. The authorities, recognizing a threat not just to public order, but to the very architecture of the self, cracked down. Research was terminated. The key was labelled a tool of anarchy. For decades, the dominant story was that Leary and his cohort were foolish hedonists who ruined a promising field of study. But there is another, quieter truth. They were also pioneers who stumbled into a territory too powerful for their maps. They asked a question that society was not ready to hear. What if the sacred is not a story we tell, but a dimension we can experience? And what if there are tools that can grant us temporary access? This is the spiritual fault line that runs beneath the entire story. Our civilization is built on a bargain. We traded the animistic, participatory world of the sacred for the objective, material world of science. We gained control and lost connection. The psychedelic experience, in its most profound expression, threatens to revoke that bargain. It suggests that matter and spirit are not separate realms, but two languages describing the same miracle. It proposes that consciousness may not be a lonely accident inside the skull, but a fundamental property of the universe, like gravity or light. Pollan, the secular Jew, the empiricist, grappled with this deeply. He could not dismiss the reality of the encounter. It was more real than real, yet he could not accept the easy conclusions of religion. He found a middle path in the Buddha concept of conscious realism, proposed by some cognitive scientists. The idea that the world is made not of matter or spirit, but of consciousness itself. The mind is not in the brain. The brain is a receiver, a reducer, tuning into a narrow band of a much wider signal. The psychedelic, then, is not creating an illusion. It is removing the filter, allowing more of the signal to come through. This is a metaphor that changes everything. The cage is not a prison we are born into. It is a receiver we are born with. Its job is to keep out the overwhelming totality of the signal, so we can focus on the task at hand: survival, reproduction, building a shelter. But what if, in our age of abundance and existential anxiety, the receiver has become too good at its job? What if it filters out not just cosmic noise, but the very frequencies of meaning, connection, and awe that make life worth living? We are dying, not of starvation, but of famine in a field of plenty. The depression, the anxiety, the soul sickness of the modern age Could it be in part a symptom of signal loss? A desperate longing for the connection our receiver has been designed to exclude? This is where the journey stops being about psychology and starts being about ecology. Not just the ecology of the mind, but of our place in the cosmos. The encounter with the other feels like re-establishing a connection to a network from which we have been painfully individuated. It is the experience of being a single cell feeling for the first time the health and intelligence of the whole organism. And in that feeling, the cell's petty concerns are both relativized and sanctified. It matters because it is part of the whole, and it is free from its own isolation. Pollen returned from his encounters humbled. He did not become the evangelist. He became a witness. He had seen the receiver for what it was, and had briefly tuned it to a different station. He could not prove the signal was objectively real, but he knew the experience of listening was transformative. It dissolved the loneliness at the core of the human condition. It replaced the narrative of a separate self with the felt sense of being a participant in something vast, intelligent, and strangely compassionate. The door, once opened, reveals not an answer, but a deeper, more beautiful question. The question is not, do you believe in God? The question becomes, what is the nature of the connection you feel to everything that is? And perhaps more urgently, how do you live? How do you think? How do you garden or write or love, knowing that this connection is the fundamental fact and your separation is the necessary, tragic, and temporary dream? The cage door is open. The receiver is adjustable. You're not just the static, you're also the song. After the encounter, you are left with a memory of wholeness, but you live in a world of fragments. This is the central ache of the return. How do you bring the mountain into the marketplace? How do you hold the silence of eternity in a conversation about the weather? Integration, they call it. The word feels too mechanical, like fitting a piece into a puzzle. What it really feels like is translation. You've been shown a text written in the language of light, emotion, and direct knowing. Now you must translate it into the clumsy, linear language of words and actions. You must build a bridge between the two worlds and walk across it every day. For Pollen, this meant a daily practice of erosion. The insights from his journeys were not stones to be placed on a shelf. They were soft clays, susceptible to the relentless rain of habit. The old mental pathways, though weakened, were still the most well-trodden. Fear, judgment, and the impatient ego would quickly regrow their weeds in the freshly tilled soil of his awareness. He found that the medicine had not given him a new self. It had given him a new relationship to his old self. He could see the machinery of his personality, the desire for approval, the knee-jerk pessimism, the careful curation of his identity, with a kind of affectionate detachment. He was no longer fully identified with the machinery. He was the one in the maintenance room, watching the dials and levers, and this space, this tiny gap between stimulus and reaction, was where his freedom now lived. This gap is the territory of mindfulness. Pollen turned to meditation, not as a spiritual discipline, but as a practical tool for sustaining the view. Sitting in silence each morning, he practiced what the psychedelic had forced upon him, the act of observing thoughts without getting on the train with them. He was cultivating the witness, the silent awareness that had been revealed as his true home during the journey. He was exercising the muscle of attention, learning to hold it steady on the breath, on a sensation, so it wouldn't be so easily captured by the next worrying thought or enticing memory. He began to see meditation and the psychedelic experience as complementary technologies. The psychedelic was the rocket booster, a violent, instantaneous thrust out of the atmosphere of the self. Meditation was the orbital adjustment, the gentle, sustained firing of thrusters that keeps you in that new, higher perspective. One shows you the view, the other helps you build a home there. But integration also happens in the mundane. He would garden, but differently. His hands in the soil were no longer just performing a task, they were participating in a conversation with life itself. He felt the intelligence of the mycelial network beneath the surface, the patient determination of the seed. Weeding became less of a chore and more of a practice in discernment. What serves the life of this system, and what chokes it? The garden became a mirror of his mind. This points to the ecological heart of the change. A mind that has experienced its own interconnection does not simply feel better. It begins to think differently. It thinks in terms of relationships, not isolated objects. It sees the self not as a castle to be defended, but as a node in a web. Your pain is not only yours, it is a ripple in a shared field. Your joy nourishes something beyond you. This is not a mystical idea, but a perceptual shift. You start to feel the truth of John Donne's line, "No man is an island." This shift has profound moral implications. If the barrier between self and world is permeable, then your responsibility extends. It extends to the people you hurt with a thoughtless word, because that word arises from your ecosystem and lands in theirs. It extends to the animal, the forest, the river. You cannot truly harm another without feeling it as a disharmony within the larger system of which you are a part. Guilt is replaced by a sense of sacred responsibility. Yet the path is not one of serene, uninterrupted unity. The self, that old and cunning narrator, is a survivor. It co-opts spirituality. Pollen would catch himself after a profound insight, feeling spiritually proud. Look how aware I am now that ego had simply found a new, more enlightened costume. This is the endless work, to spot the disguise, to smile at its ingenuity, and to gently return to the humble stance of the witness. He also faced the dark night of the integration. The vivid afterglow fades. The world's greyness can feel greyer by contrast. You have tasted a feast, and now you are back on a diet of crumbs. A deep loneliness can set in, not the loneliness of being alone, but the loneliness of knowing a truth that is invisible to almost everyone around you. You speak in metaphors that fall on deaf ears. You feel like a secret agent returned from a sublime mission, unable to file a report. This is where community becomes essential. Poland sought out others who had taken the journey. They didn't need to explain. A look was enough. In their company, the reality of the other world was reaffirmed. It wasn't just a dream he had, it was a country they had all visited. This is why throughout history, those who have undergone initiations have always formed circles. To be alone with a shattered worldview is dangerous. To be together in the reassembly is how new worlds are built. In the end, integration is not about achieving a permanent state of psychedelic grace. It is about becoming a bilingual citizen of two realms, the realm of the ordinary, with its taxes and traffic and trivialities, and the realm of the extraordinary, with its tolerance, its unity, and its demanding love. It is about letting the wisdom of the second realm irrigate the first. To be kind, not because you should, but because you have felt the literal interconnectedness of all beings. To be patient, because you have experienced the vastness of time. To be in awe, because you know the mundane world is just the most common frequency of a miraculous signal. The mind has been changed, not from a fixed point to another fixed point, but from a noun to a verb. It is no longer a thing you have, but a process you inhabit, a relationship you tend. The cage is gone. In its place is a garden with well-tended paths and wild, untamed edges. You are the gardener. You're also the soil, the seed, and the falling rain. And somewhere beyond the wall you once thought was the horizon, the other is watching, not as a warden, but as the sun watches the flower turn its face toward the light. There is a moment in every great story where the seeker must turn back. The vision has been granted, the truth tasted, but the mountain peak is not a place to live. The air is too thin, the light is too pure. To stay is to die of exposure, or to become a statue, a monument to an experience, frozen in awe, useless to the world below. Pollen faced this return. He had stood in the cathedral of his own mind, had felt the dissolve of every boundary that separated him from the pulsing heart of existence. Now he had to walk back down into the valley of the human, where boundaries are everything, where you are your name, your job, your history, and the delicate, exhausting dance of managing all three. This is the paradox no one prepares you for. Awakening can be a profoundly isolating event. You see the dream, but everyone else is still sleeping, and their sleep seems so convincing. Their worries about status, their certainties about reality, their unexamined rush through life. It all feels like a play performed with immense seriousness on a stage you now realize is made of cardboard and moonlight. You want to shout. You want to shake them. Don't you see the walls aren't real? But you don't, because you also see that their sleep is necessary. Their dream is what holds their world together. To tear it from them would be an act of violence, so you learn to speak in two languages. You learn to nod at the meeting, to discuss the logistics, all the while holding in your heart the silent, screaming knowledge of the infinite. You become a secret keeper of the sublime. This creates a new kind of loneliness. It is not the loneliness of being alone, but of being alone in knowing. Pollen describes it as a form of Cossack nostalgia, a homesickness for a home that never existed in time or space, but one you have visited and can never fully forget. It is the grief for unity that your very individuality prevents you from sustaining. You are a wave that has remembered for a moment that it is the ocean, but you must still crash upon the shore as a wave, and so the work becomes one of translation. How do you distill the wordless, overwhelming epiphany into a form that can be carried? How do you bottle the lightning of direct revelation so it can power a small, steady lamp for your daily path? For some, it becomes art, a melody that holds the echo of the cosmic hum, a painting that tries to capture the fluid geometry of thought itself. For others, it becomes activism, a fierce, compassionate drive to heal the world they now see as an extension of their own body. For Pollen, it became writing. The careful, meticulous arrangement of words on a page became his ritual of integration. Each sentence was a stone in a bridge between the two worlds. To explain it was to understand it. To narrate it was to tame it, just enough so it could live beside him without burning down the house. But the self is a cunning entity. It does not surrender its kingdom easily. It can co-opt enlightenment itself. Pollen noticed subtle, troubling shifts. A subtle spiritual pride, a quiet voice that said, "I have seen what others have not. I know a deeper truth." The ego, it seems, is a shapeshifter. Burn down its castle and it will rebuild a humble hermitage on the ashes and call it enlightenment. It will wear the robes of the wise and whisper its old desires in a new, sacred language. This is the endless inner game of whack-a-mole. You see a pattern, a tendency to judge, a flare of fear, and you apply the light of awareness to it. It dissolves. You feel clear, and then, days later, it reappears in a different alley of the mind, disguised as concern, as rational analysis, as righteous indignation. The mind is not a problem to be solved. It is a protean process to be witnessed again and again with endless patience. This led Pollen to a darker, more unsettling question. What if the ego that gets dissolved in the journey is not the enemy, but a necessary structure? What if it is the spine of the psyche? To dissolve it completely is not liberation, but psychosis. The goal, perhaps, is not to kill the narrator, but to change its relationship to the author. To let it know it is not writing the story alone, that it is taking dictation from a much deeper source. He began to see the psychedelic experience not as an annihilation, but as a recalibration. It softens the rigidity of the self, but it does not, and should not, erase its form. It is like warming a frozen river. The ice, the rigid ego, melts into water, the fluid self, but the banks of the river, the body, personal history, individual temperament, remain. The water flows more freely, but it still has a course, it has direction, it has a story. The journey doesn't end the story, it gives the story back its flow. This is the gentle, disappointing, and ultimately wise truth that emerges after the fireworks fade. You are still you. You still have your peculiarities, your wounds, your habits, but your relationship to you has changed. You hold it all more lightly. The sticky identification is gone. You are no longer glued to your own biography. You are reading it instead of being written by it. And so you return to the garden, not as an escape but as a practice. You pull the weeds of trivial worries. You plant the seeds of attention. You water the fragile shoots of compassion. You do this every day under the ordinary sun. The mystical is not elsewhere. It is hidden in the texture of the soil, in the patience of growth, in the quiet satisfaction of tending to a small corner of being. The door you pass through remains. It is not locked. You can glance at it, lean against its frame, remember the vast sky on the other side, but you don't need to live there. Your life is here in this room, with its dust and its furniture and its beautiful limited view. The difference is, you now know it's a room, and knowing that, you can finally open the window. You can let the air in, you can rearrange the chairs. You can at last make yourself at home in the only place you have ever truly been. Here, now, breathing, imperfect and awake to this astonishing fact of it all. The journey changes the traveller, but the traveller must still walk the old road. The dust will still gather on the shelves. The narrator will still chatter. But now, in the quiet moments between the words, you can hear it. The faint, everlasting hum of the signal you once tuned into. It is the background music of existence. And once you have heard it, you can never truly believe in the silence again. The story expands, and in expanding, it turns inward once more. It is not enough to have a personal revelation. The mind, once it has felt its own plasticity, begins to ask a more terrifying question: what are we collectively? If my consciousness is not a sealed vault, but a permeable node in a network, then what is this thing we call culture, society, reality itself? Is it too just a story we are telling each other? A shared dream, agreed upon by billions, its rules enforced not by laws of physics, but by the sheer weight of consensus? Pollan's investigation led him to the edge of this precipice. He looked at history through the new lens. He saw ancient cultures who built their worlds around the psychedelic experience. The Eleusinian mysteries of Greece, where initiates drank the kykeon and were shown the secrets of life and death. The shamanic traditions that span every continent, where the medicine person voyages to the spirit world to heal the tribe. In these worlds, the door was not a secret. It was the center of the village. The other was a neighbor, a relative, a fact of life. Our modern world is a radical anomaly. It is the first civilization in history to try to build itself entirely within the room, with the door not only locked but denied, its very existence treated as a myth or a mental illness. We've replaced the shaman with the psychiatrist, the vision quest with the antidepressant, the communion with the sacred with the consumption of goods. We have traded a living, participatory universe for a dead mechanical one. And we wonder why we feel so homesick, so anxious, so profoundly orphaned. The psychedelic renaissance, then, is not just a medical story. It is a cultural immune response. It is the system producing its own antidote. When a reality becomes too rigid, too oppressive, too devoid of meaning, the tools to break its spell seem to emerge from the margins. They are the counter-signal to the dominant frequency. This is why the backlash was so fierce. It wasn't just about law and order. It was about ontology, about the nature of what is real. The psychedelic experience is inherently subversive because it democratizes access to the sacred. It suggests that the priest, the guru, the academic, is not needed as a gatekeeper. The door is in your own mind. The ultimate authority is your own direct experience. To a culture built on hierarchies of knowledge and spiritual authority, this is a revolutionary, terrifying idea. But what if the real world of jobs and markets and nations is the actual trip? What if the sober, serious, materialistic consensus is the shared delusion? This is the brain-twisting loop the psychedelic experience forces you to consider. It holds up a mirror to consensus reality and asks, which one feels more alive? Which one feels more true? Not logically, but viscerally. The world of separation, competition, and endless striving feels, in the light of the experience, like a collective psychosis, a bad trip we've been having for centuries. This is the most unsettling political thought of all, that our society is built on a foundation of forgetting. We have forgotten we are connected. We have forgotten the world is alive. We have forgotten that consciousness is the ground, not the figure. And all our systems, economic, educational, penal, are elaborate machines built to protect this forgetting, to keep us busy, scared, and separate, so we never stumble upon the terrible, beautiful truth that would render those machines obsolete. Pollan does not say this outright. He is too careful a reporter. But the implication hangs in the air, like the scent of ozone after a lightning strike. His work is an invitation to look at the water we are swimming in, to question the very nature of the cage, not just our personal corner of it. Yet there is no naive return to the shaman's hut possible. We cannot uninvent the modern world. The answer is not for everyone to take psychedelics. That would be another kind of dogma, another cage. The answer, perhaps, is in the integration. It is in allowing the wisdom from beyond the door to slowly, gently reform the world inside it. What would a society look like that remembered? It might value ecology over economy, because it felt the connection in its bones. It might prioritize care over competition, because it saw the other as a part of the self. It might embrace mystery over certainty, because it had touched the vast unknown and found it benevolent. It wouldn't be a utopia. It would be a human world with all its flaws, but its foundation would be different. It would be built on the understanding of interconnection, not the myth of separation. This is the long arc. The personal journey becomes a cultural one. The change of mind becomes a change of world. It begins with a single quiet question in a single ordinary room. Is this all there is? It leads to a shaking of the walls, and it ends, or rather, it continues, with the slow, patient work of rebuilding the room with the windows open, in full remembrance of the sky. Pollen's book, then, is more than a guide. It is a message in a bottle tossed from the shores of a forgotten country. It says, the door is real, the journey is possible, and what you find there might not just save your life, it might, in some small, imperceptible way, help save our shared dream from becoming a nightmare. The key is not in a laboratory or a church or a jungle. It is in the most familiar, the most overlooked, the most mysterious place of all, the living, breathing, questioning mind that is reading these words right now, wondering what is on the other side. We must speak of the brain, not as a cold machine, but as an ancient city, a city built upon itself, layer upon layer, over millions of years. In its deepest basements, in the brainstem, lie the old automatic rhythms, the beat of the heart, the gasp of the lung, the primal urges of hunger and fear. This is the ancient reptilian quarter, where consciousness is a faint rumour. Rising above it are the limbic layers, the old mammalian city. Here emotion paints the world. Here memory is etched not as fact but as feeling. This is the seat of love, of grief, of the bond between mother and child. It is a city of tides, sometimes calm, sometimes stormy. And crowning it all, like a sprawling modern metropolis of glass and wire, is the neocortex, the seat of reason, language, planning, the sense of a self that exists across time. This is where the narrator lives. In its busiest district, the prefrontal cortex, the story of you is written, revised, and obsessively defended. For most of our lives, we live in this modern metropolis, believe we are its mayor. We believe our conscious thoughts from the neon-lit streets of the cortex are running the show, but below, the old cities never sleep. Their needs, their traumas, their ancient programming hum along, often dictating the policies of the mayor without his knowledge. The default mode network is the city's central administration. It is the bureaucracy of the self. It manages the traffic between these districts. It files memories in the proper cabinets. It checks the present moment against the plans for the future. It constantly answers the question, what does this mean for me? It is vital. It creates efficiency, a sense of continuous identity, but it can also become rigid, corrupt. It can wall off entire neighbourhoods. It can declare an old trauma from the limbic city a forbidden zone, and spend vast resources on detours to avoid it. It can mistake its own maps for the territory. What the psychedelic molecule does is not random. It is a precise temporary revolution. It begins at the molecular level, with a key fitting into a lock. The psilocybin or LSD molecule is a near-perfect mimic of serotonin, one of the brain's crucial chemical messengers. It slips into the serotonin 2A receptors, which are like ornate ancient locks scattered throughout the city, but densely clustered on the neocortical spires. It turns the key, and the city goes quiet. Not a dead quiet, a different kind of quiet. The central administration, the default mode network, experiences a brownout. Its lights dim, its phones stop ringing. The bureaucrats of the ego step away from their desks. The rigid hierarchy of information flow breaks down. This is when the magic or the science happens. With the central authority offline, the collected neighbourhoods begin to speak. The old mammalian city, with its raw, poetic emotions, sends embassies directly to the visual cortex. You don't just remember a childhood sadness. You see it as a blue, weeping landscape. A forgotten joy becomes a golden light pouring from your chest. The barriers between the districts dissolve. The visual cortex talks to the auditory cortex, so you see the shape of sound. The sense of touch communicates directly with the memory centers, so a texture from 40 years ago is present on your skin. The brain becomes what neuroscientists call entropic. It becomes more chaotic, but a creative chaos. It is like a city during a festival, when all the normal rules are suspended. The baker is dancing with the banker. The firefighter is discussing poetry with the librarian. New connections are made, old hardened pathways are bypassed. The city remembers it is one organism. This hyper-connected state is the neural correlate of the feeling of oneness, of the dissolution of boundaries. When there is no central filter deciding what is self and not self, the signal from your hand and the signal from the wood of the table you're touching become part of the same vibrant symphony of neural activity. You are the table, you are the music, you are the space between breaths. But here is the crucial healing mystery. This festival does not just end. When the molecule leaves the receptors, when the central administration boots back up, it does not return to its old rigid patterns. The festival has left its mark. The new conversations between districts have left faint trails, new lines of communication. The bureaucracy has been humbled. It has seen that the city can run, and can run with more beauty and less suffering when it is less controlling. This is the afterglow, a period of neural plasticity. The brain is like warmed clay, impressionable. This is the critical window for therapy, for integration. The old depressive story, the well-worn neural rut of I am worthless or it, has been physically interrupted. A new story can be laid down. The traumatic memory, once a walled-off fortress in the limbic city, has been visited, felt and reintegrated into the larger geography of the self. It is no longer a forbidden zone that dictates all the traffic routes. It is now a park, perhaps a somber one, but a place you can walk through without fear. Pollen's journeys were not just psychological events, they were architectural renovations at the speed of light. His brain, for a few hours, became a different city, and when it reconstituted, the blueprint had changed. The mayor still had an office, but the walls were now made of glass. He could see into the older quarters, he could hear their needs directly. The government had become more responsive, more democratic, more whole. This is the profound promise. We are not stuck with the brain we have. The city can be replanned. The rigid, depressive, anxious pathways are not life sentences. They are habits, cemented by time and pain. The psychedelic experience is a radical tool for breaking the cement, just long enough to lay down new, healthier streets. But it is only a tool. The festival is not a place to live. A city needs some administration. The ego in its proper humble role is necessary. It gets you to work on time. It remembers your partner's birthday. It is the captain of the ship, not its tyrant. The goal is not to drown the captain, but to let him hear the wisdom of the crew and the song of the sea itself. The mind is a city, and sometimes, for its own survival, a city needs a carnival. Yet every power has its shadow. Every key that opens a door can also, in the wrong hands, break a lock forever. The psychedelic experience is not a benign teacher. It is a fierce one. It does not care about your comfort. It cares about truth. And truth, as the old stories tell us, can be a blinding, shattering light. We must speak of the bad trip. This is the spectre that haunts the Renaissance. The cultural memory of the 1960s is not just of love and peace, but of freakouts, of psychotic breaks, of people jumping from windows believing they could fly. These stories are not all myth. They are the dark reflection in the mirror. They warn us this is not a game. In the clinical trials Pollen observed, the guides were meticulous. They spoke of challenging experiences, not bad trips. The difference is not semantic. A challenging experience is part of the process. It is the psyche presenting you with the very thing you need to see, the wounded thing you have spent a lifetime avoiding. It is the surgery, not the disease. In a safe container with skilled guides, these challenging experiences are often the most transformative. You meet your fear, your grief, your death, and you pass through it. A bad trip is what happens when that surgery is performed in a dirty alley by someone who doesn't know what they're doing. It is terror without context, without meaning, without a hand to hold. It is the ultimate nightmare, the walls of reality dissolving, with no safe centre to return to, and no one to assure you that you will return. Pollen interviewed people who had been there. They described hours that felt like eternities in hell. Paranoia so total it felt like the universe itself was malicious. A sense of ego dissolution that was not blissful but annihilating, a terrifying melt into nothingness. Visions of grotesque demonic entities, the certainty that they had gone insane forever. What creates this? Setting. The mind is everything. If you approach the experience with fear or frivolity or in an unstable psychological state, the medicine will amplify that. It turns up the volume on whatever music is playing. If the music is chaos and fear, the experience will be a symphony of dread. The substance itself is physiologically safe. You cannot overdose on LSD or psilocybin in a lethal way. The danger is psychological. It is the danger of being unprepared for the death of yourself. It is the danger of having your deepest defenses torn down before you have built any foundations of trust or safety. It is like being thrown into the deep ocean before you have learned to swim. This is why the guides are so essential. They are the lifeguards. They do not guide the journey. The journey is yours alone. but they hold the space. They are the anchor to the world of names and forms. A gentle touch, a few calm words. This is a memory. It will pass. You are safe. Can be the rope that pulls a traveller back from the abyss of pure panic. Pollen himself faced moments of sheer terror, the feeling of dying, the loss of all mooring. But because he was prepared, because he had intention, and because he had a guide he trusted, he could follow the instruction: trust, let go, be open. He could surrender into the fear and discover it was not an end, but a passage. The shadow then is not in the molecule. The shadow is in us. It is our unpreparedness, our cultural illiteracy about non-ordinary states of consciousness, our tendency to treat profound tools as entertainment. The bad trip is the price of arrogance. It is the mind's way of saying, you were not ready to see this. You did not respect the fire. There is another shadow, more subtle, the shadow of meaning. When you have seen the world as this divine interconnected dance, how do you return to a life of mundane tasks? For some, the answer is to reject the mundane entirely. They become spiritual seekers, chasing the peak experience, dismissing ordinary life as illusion. They become trapped in what Buddhists call spiritual materialism, collecting experiences and insights like trophies, their ego now dressed in robes. This is another kind of bad trip, one that lasts for years. It is the failure to integrate. It is becoming a refugee from reality instead of its ambassador. The journey, therefore, demands a fierce humility. It is not for everyone. It is not a weekend adventure. It is a pilgrimage into the deepest layers of the self, and it requires a pilgrim's seriousness, a pilgrim's respect. The guides often screen people with a personal or family history of psychosis. The door is not for every mind. Some architectures are too fragile for such a quake. Pollen's work does not shy from this shadow. It stares into it, because to ignore the shadow is to make the light into a childish fantasy. The medicine is powerful. Power can heal and power can destroy. It depends on the vessel, the intention, the skill of the navigator. So the story deepens. It is no longer just about opening doors, it is about learning to stand in the doorway, feeling both the wind from the infinite and the warmth of the hearth at your back. It is about knowing your own fragility, your own darkness, and proceeding with respect. The key is not a toy, it is a responsibility. The mind is a sacred temple, and you would not, in your right mind, let a reveller with a sledgehammer do renovations. You would hire a wise, careful architect. The journey within is no different. You must be both the temple and the architect, and the respectful, awestruck worshipper all at once. The shadow is there to teach you that, to remind you of the stakes. This is not about feeling good, it is about becoming whole. And wholeness, by its very nature, includes the dark. Consider the seed. A hard, dry thing, a closed fist. Within it, the blueprint for a forest is compressed into silence. For it to become what it is meant to be, it must be buried. It must be surrounded by the dark, the pressure, the cold damp of the earth. It must, in a sense, die to being a seed. Its shell must soften, crack, and yield. Only then can the first pale tendril push downward and the first green shoot climb toward the light. The human psyche is not so different. We are born as potential. Then life happens. We are buried under expectations, under trauma, under the heavy soil of a culture that tells us who we are supposed to be. For protection, we grow a shell, a personality, a story of a separate self. It hardens with each disappointment, each failure, each heartache. In time, we forget we are anything but the shell. The soft, pulsing life inside goes dormant. We call this maturity. We call it sanity. The psychedelic experience is the sudden, radical soaking of that seed. It is the flood of warm rain that saturates the hardened casing. It is the chemical message that says, the season has changed. It is safe to break open. This breaking open is what we fear most. We call it psychosis. We call it losing our mind. But in the right context, it is siesa. It is not loss. It is germination. Pollen's research led him to a startling frontier of thought. What if mental illness, some of it, is not a disease of the brain, but a stuck process? A germination that has gone awry, trapped between the seed and the shoot, terrified in the dark? What if depression is the weight of the soil feeling like a tomb? What if anxiety is the seed's panic, feeling the pressure to grow but seeing no light? And what if the hallucinations of psychosis are not random noise, but but the raw, unfiltered blueprint of the psyche trying to express itself, like the chute smashing blindly against the inside of the shell. This is not to romanticize suffering, it is to see it through a different lens, a lens of process. The psychedelic in the therapeutic model does not aim to suppress the symptoms, it aims to complete the process. It provides the catalyst for a purposeful, guided breaking. The therapist guide is the gardener who ensures the soil is right, who trusts the intelligence within the seed, and who protects the fragile new growth as it reaches for the air. This changes everything about healing. It moves us from a model of correction to a model of midwifery. You're not fixing a broken machine, you're attending a difficult, sacred birth. The patient is not a passive recipient of cure, they are an active participant in their own becoming. The medicine does not do the work. It initiates the conditioned under which the psyche's own healing intelligence can do its work. This is why the stories from the cancer trials are so profound. Faced with the ultimate existential pressure, the soil of mortality, these individuals were given a tool to break open before the physical end. They were able to experience the death of their ego, their story, their fear, in a space of safety and love. And in that death, they found not annihilation, but a profound reconnection to life. They greened. Their final days were not of withering, but of flowering. But this germination metaphor extends beyond the clinic. It applies to the culture itself. Our civilization is a hardened seed. We have built a world on separation, extraction, and control. We are trapped in our own shell, feeling the increasing pressure, seeing no light. The ecological crisis, the social fracturing, the pervasive loneliness, these are the symptoms of a collective psyche that is stuck, desperate to break into a new form of being. The psychedelic renaissance, then, can be seen as a cultural germination event, a collective soaking. The old shell of rigid materialism, of hyper-individualism, is being saturated by questions that come from the inside. The message is the same. The season has changed. It is no longer safe to stay closed. The fear, of course, is that the breakdown will be chaotic, that the new growth will be monstrous. This is the legitimate terror of every revolution. But the lesson from the individual journey is that chaos is only a phase. It is the necessary dissolution of old structure so new, more adaptive patterns can form. The guides for our culture are the wise elders, the artists, the scientists, the indigenous voices who remember that breakdown and breakthrough are two sides of the same cracking shell. Pollen, the careful journalist, becomes a witness to this larger cracking. He is not advocating for everyone to take mushrooms. He's pointing to the principle they reveal, that rigidity is a prelude to shattering cores, and that shattering, when met with care and intention, can be the beginning of growth. The mind is a seed, yours and ours. The door that opens is not an exit from reality, but an entrance into a deeper layer of it. The journey is the soaking, the integration is the slow, deliberate reaching for the light. We are all, each in our own way, buried in the dark, and we are all, each in our own way, containing a forest. The choice is not whether to break. The choice is how to break, in terror, alone, against the walls of our own making, or in trust, with help, toward a sky we have always sensed was there. The shell is not your enemy. It protected the life within. But when the season turns, there comes prison. The sound you hear, the unsettling crack, is not the end of you. It is the beginning of what you are meant to become. Listen, there is a silence that exists before words. It is not an empty silence, but a full one. It is the silence of the source. In the deepest moments of the psychedelic journey, language falls away. You don't think in sentences. You know in wholes. You understand through a direct transmission of being, where a concept like love or connection is not a word but a lived reality, a field you're swimming in. Returning from that place, you are faced with the impossible task of translation. How do you describe the taste of water to a stone? How do you explain colour to one born blind? This is the existential loneliness of the traveller. To have visited a country where language is obsolete, and to be forced to use language as your only map to prove it exists. Pollen grapples with this. His entire career is built on words, their precision, their power to explain. But here, at the peak of his investigation, words fail. They become clumsy nets thrown at a butterfly of meaning. They capture only the dust from its wings. He must resort, as all who have been there resort, to metaphor. The mind is a cage, a receiver, a seed, a city. These are not facts, they are finger-pointing at the moon. This failure vocabulary of language is not a flaw. It is a central feature of the territory. It tells us something vital about the nature of consciousness itself. Ordinary consciousness is a narrativizing machine. It takes the raw, wordless flow of experience and instantly packages it into stories. I am happy. This is a tree. She hurt me. These stories are useful. They help us navigate. But we mistake the package for the thing itself. We live in the commentary, not in the experience. The psychedelic experience turns down the volume on the narrator. It unplugs the packaging machine. For a time, you experience the world without the filter of language. You are the happiness. You participate in the treeness. The hurt is a pure energy moving through the field of awareness, not a story about a villain and a victim. This is terrifying, and then it is liberating. You realize how much of your suffering is not in the events, but in the relentless judgmental narration about the events. This is where the journey meets ancient contemplative traditions. Meditation at its core is the practice of quieting the narrator. It is sitting in the silence before words, watching them arise and fall without getting on the train with them. The psychedelic journey is a forced, rapid immersion into that silence. It is the difference between slowly learning to swim in a pool and being thrown into the ocean during a storm. Both teach you about water. One is a practice, the other is an initiation. Pollan began to see the two technologies as sister arts. The psychedelic is the explosion that clears the tangled overgrowth of the self. Meditation is the daily gardening that keeps the clearing open. One provides the revolutionary insight, the other builds the discipline to live from that insight. Without the gardening, the jungle of old thought patterns grows back. Without the initial explosion, the gardener might spend a lifetime trimming weeds, never knowing a meadow was possible. This synthesis points a way out of the loneliness. The community you seek is not necessarily of those who have taken the journey, but of those who value the silence behind the words. You find it in the meditation hall, in certain circles of artists, in the quiet companionship of people who are comfortable with not knowing, with mystery. Their language is different. They speak with pauses. They understand that some things are communicated not by what is said, but by what is left unsaid in the space between you. The ultimate integration, then, is linguistic. It is learning to speak from a deeper place, to use words not as walls to define your territory, but as bridges built from your shore to another's, to hold your stories more lightly, to offer them as gifts, not as fortifications, to sometimes have the courage to say, I have no words for it, and to share the quiet that follows. The cage of the mind is, to a large degree, a cage of language. We are trapped in a looping monologue of our own creation. The key opens a window to the world before and beyond that monologue. You come back realizing that the most important things, love, beauty, peace, connection, are not things you can think or talk your way into. They are places you arrive at when thinking and talking cease. So you garden, you walk, you breathe, you do the dishes, and in those moments when the narrator takes a breath, you feel it again. The silent, wordless hum of the world just as it is. You don't need to describe it, you just need to know it's there. And in that knowing, you're no longer lonely. You're home. The translation is imperfect. It always will be. But the original text is written in the language of existence itself, and it is always available in the space between one thought and the next, waiting for you to stop reading and simply be. Time changes. That is the first thing you notice and the last thing you can explain. In the heart of the journey, time ceases to be a line. It becomes a landscape and you can wander in it. You can stand in the center of a moment and see its infinite depth, like staring into a well that goes down forever. A single note of music can contain a lifetime of longing. A breath can feel like the rise and fall of civilizations. We think we understand time. We measure it, we race against it, we mourn its passage. We see it as a river carrying us in one direction, from the solid past, through the narrow keyhole of the present, into the uncertain future. This is the time of the ego, the time of the story. It is linear time, and it is the time of anxiety. Because in a story there is always what came before, regret, and what comes next, fear. But the psychedelic experience reveals time as something else, something more primordial. It reveals what physicists point to with their equations, that past, present, and future may be a stubborn illusion of consciousness. In the dissolved state, you do not move through time. Time moves through you. Or rather, it exists all at once, a vast, still painting, and your ordinary consciousness is just a tiny flashlight moving in a slow, straight line across its surface. Pollen experienced this directly. He would look at a potted plant and see, not a static object, but the entire process of its being, the seed bursting, the stem reaching, the leaves unfolding, the eventual withering, all happening simultaneously in a single, shimmering vision. He wasn't seeing the future or the past. He was seeing the plant's time, whole. He was seeing its essence, which includes its becoming and its fading. This shattering of linear time is one of the most healing aspects of the experience, especially for those facing death. When time is a line, death is the terrifying period at the end of the sentence. But when time is a landscape, death is just a feature of the terrain, a valley, a mountain range, a change in the light. It is part of the wholeness, not the end of it. The ego, which can only imagine its own extinction, dissolves. And what remains is a participation in a process that has no end, because it was never a line to begin with. This forces a question that is not philosophical but visceral. What if our greatest suffering, our anxiety, is rooted in our perception of time? We are haunted by ghosts of the past and phantoms of the future. We are never here. We are prisoners of then and when. The narrator in our head is a time traveller, and a miserable one, constantly jumping between regret and worry, rarely landing in the present where life is actually being lived. The medicine, by dissolving the ego, temporarily stops the time travel. It strands you in the eternal now, and in that now there is no problem. There is only being. Even if the being is painful, it is a pure pain, not complicated by stories of why me, or how long will this last? It just is. And in that simple isness there is a kind of peace. Returning from this is like returning from a country where clocks are considered absurd. You look at your watch and the numbers seem arbitrary. You sit in a meeting planning for 2.25 years from now, and the concept feels like a shared fiction, a collective agreement to pretend the line is real. This can be disorienting, but it can also be freeing. Integration in this dimension means learning to bring the wisdom of the eternal now into the practical flow of linear time. It doesn't mean abandoning plans. It means making plans from a place of presence, not anxiety. It means feeling the solid ground of now beneath your feet, even as you look at the calendar. It means catching yourself when you are mentally time-traveling into worry, and gently pulling your awareness back to your breath, to the feel of the chair, to the sound in the room, to the only time that is ever actually real. This changes your relationship with memory too. In ordinary consciousness, a memory is a story. It is an edited, narrated clip from the movie of your life. Under the influence of the medicine, a memory is not recalled. It is relived. It is re-embodied. You are not remembering the sadness of a childhood event. You are 4 years old, on the floor, feeling that sadness in your body, with the pristine clarity of the original moment. But because your adult awareness is also present, you can hold that child with compassion. You can understand the event not as an isolated trauma, but as a moment in a flowing process. You can recontextualize it. You can, in a very real sense, heal the past by being fully present to it in the now. This is the alchemy. The past is not fixed, it is a story we tell. And when we re-enter the memory with the expanded awareness of the present, we can change the story. We can remove the poison of shame or the thorn of resentment. We can see the other actors in the drama not as monsters, but as wounded people themselves. We can forgive. We do not change the facts. We change the meaning. And in changing the meaning, we change the neural pathway that holds the memory. We rewrite the code of our suffering. So time is not the enemy. Our perception of it is. The cage of time is a mental construct, a necessary simplification for survival. But we have mistaken the simplification for reality. The journey shows you the vastness outside the cage. The practice is to live in the world of clocks and calendars without forgetting the sky that contains them. You begin to see your life not as a desperate sprint from birth to death, but as a work of art being painted on the canvas of eternity. Some strokes are dark, some are light, but they all belong. The painting is not about the final stroke, it is about the whole composition, and you are both the painter, and the paint, and the blank space waiting for the next brushstroke. Time is not running out, it is being fulfilled in each breath, in each moment of attention. The door opens and you see that you are never in the river. You are the riverbed, and the water flowing over you is both the past and the future. And it is always only now. Then comes the doubt. It is inevitable. As the vividness of the journey fades into the soft focus of memory, the questioning mind reasserts itself. Was it real? Or was it just a fascinating dream? A brilliant trick of a brain under chemical siege? Did you discover truth or merely manufacture a convincing illusion of truth? Pollen wrestled with this deeply. The rationalist in him, the reporter, demanded evidence, but the evidence was subjective, a feeling, a shift in perspective, a memory of awe. How do you prove the colour blue to someone? How do you prove the reality of an inner landscape? This doubt is not the enemy. It is the necessary ground upon which faith of a secular kind must be built. Without doubt, the experience becomes dogma. It becomes a new cage, perhaps more beautiful, but a cage nonetheless. I have seen the truth, and this is it. That certainty is the ego's last, most sophisticated fortress. The guides and researchers have a pragmatic answer. They don't talk about metaphysical truth, they talk about utility. Does the experience produce lasting, positive change in your life? Does it alleviate suffering? Does it make you more compassionate, less fearful, more open? If it does, then its reality is somewhat beside the point. It is a useful fiction, a narrative so powerful it rewires the brain for the better. In this view, the experience is a psychological tool, a catalyst for transformation. The visions are not visitors from another dimension. They are projections of your own unconscious, given form and voice so you can finally converse with them. But for the traveller, this reduction can feel like a betrayal. The sense of contact with an other was too vivid, too intelligent, too foreign to be just a part of oneself. It felt like meeting the ocean, not a cup of water you were carrying. Pollen finds a middle way in the concept of the unspeakable. There are dimensions of human experience that language and logic cannot map. Love is one, beauty is another. The psychedelic revelation is a third. To try to nail it down with the blunt tools of rationalism is to miss the point. The point is the experience itself and the change it effects. The mystery is not a problem to be solved, but a reality to be honoured. He also turns to history. For millennia, human beings have reported contact with other realms through fasting, drumming, chanting, and yes, plant medicines. The consistency of the reports, the sense of a living intelligence, the life review, the death and rebirth motif, is staggering. It suggests we are tapping into something fundamental about the structure of human consciousness, or perhaps the structure of reality itself. To dismiss it all as fantasy is a form of arrogance, a claim that our modern materialist worldview has a monopoly on truth. The doubt, therefore, becomes a partner. It keeps the experience alive as a question, not a dead answer. It forces you to live the insights, to test them in the fire of daily life. Do you still feel connected when you're stuck in traffic? Can you access that peace during an argument? This is the proving ground. If the experience was just a chemical vacation, its effects will fade, leaving only a nostalgic longing. But if it touched something real, it will become a well you can return to, a touchstone of clarity you can find in moments of quiet reflection. Pollen finds his proof not in the visions, but in the aftermath, in the quieting of his inner critic, in the deepened love for his wife, seen with fewer projections and more simple presence, in the garden where he no longer feels like a manager of life, but a participant in it. The truth of the journey is verified by the fruit it bears in his ordinary life. This leads to a humble conclusion. We may never know what these experiences are in an absolute sense, but we can know what they do. They break the tyranny of the isolated self. They reconnect us with a sense of wonder and meaning. They can heal unbearable pain. In a world dying of disconnection, these are not trivial effects. So you live with the doubt. You allow it. You even thank it. It prevents you from becoming a true believer, from building a new religion around your personal revelation. You hold the experience lightly as a gift, not a possession. A window that opened, not a property you own. The mind that returns from the journey is not a mind that has found answers. It is a mind that has learned to live with deeper, better questions. The cage of certainty has been replaced by the open field of mystery. And in that field you are free to wonder, to explore, to feel the awe of not knowing. The door showed you that the room is not all there is. It did not give you a map of the outside, it just showed you that outside exists. The rest of your life is the exploration. And the doubt is the compass that keeps you honest, reminding you that the territory is always vaster than your understanding of it. You are a traveller, not a settler, and the journey has no end, only deeper beginnings. And so we return to the garden, not as a metaphor but as a place, a real place of soil and leaf, of slow growth and patient decay. This is where Michael Pollan began, a man with his hands in the earth, tending to the tangible, believing in what he could see and touch and name. This is also where he returns, after all the journeys inward, after the dissolution of walls and the encounters with the infinite. But he returns different. The gardener has seen the seed from the inside. He has felt the consciousness of the green growing thing. This is the final quiet truth of changing your mind. You don't end up in some otherworldly realm. You end up here, right here, in the body, in the life, in this world that is simultaneously mundane and miraculous. The great revelation is not a secret about the cosmos. It is a secret about this. The ordinary, the everyday, the texture of the now you have spent a lifetime rushing through. The psychedelic journey, for all its fireworks, serves a profoundly humble purpose. It restores your astonishment. It strips the dust of habit from the world. You look at your hand, the same hand that began this inquiry, and you do not see a biological tool belonging to a separate self. You see a mystery, a confluence of stardust and story, a temporary pattern in the endless flow of energy and information. You see it with the eyes of a child, but with the understanding of an adult who knows how precious and fleeting this particular arrangement is. Pollan, in his final reflections, does not advocate for mass psychedelic use. He is not a prophet of a new chemical religion. He is a witness to a possibility, the possibility that the mind we take as fixed, with its loops of anxiety, its walls of depression, its narrow story of who we are, is not the final draft. It is a manuscript, and we are allowed to edit. The medicines are one way to access the editing room, but they are not the only way. Meditation, art, profound grief, unbridled love, even the brush with mortality, these too can throw open the doors of perception. They are all catalysts for the same essential process, the shaking loose of the ego's grip so a larger awareness can breathe. The work then is not in the catalyst, but in the integration, in the courageous and unglamorous daily effort to live from the glimpse you were given. To remember, when you are offended or afraid, that the you being threatened is a construct. To act from compassion not as a moral obligation, but as a biological fact of interconnection. To see the face of the sacred in the stranger, in the weed breaking through the concrete, in the silent, empty space between thoughts. The cage was never locked. The door was never hidden. The prison was built from the inside with the bricks of our unquestioned thoughts, mortared with our fear of the open sky. The journey shows you the construction from the outside, and from there you can't unsee it. You can, of course, choose to walk back inside and pretend the walls are solid. Many do. It's easier, but once you know they are your own construction, the pretense becomes a conscious act, a kind of spiritual bad faith. So what remains? A responsibility, not a heavy, burdensome one, but a light, clear one, the responsibility of care. If the self is not a fortress but a garden, then your duty is to tend it, to pull the weeds of poisonous thought, to water the seeds of kindness and curiosity, to ensure the soil of your attention is rich and receptive, and to know that your garden is not separate from the one next door or from the wild forest beyond the fence. They are all part of the same earth, the same weather, the same turning towards the light. Pollan closes his investigation not with a bang but with a whisper, the whisper of the leaves in his own garden. He has travelled to the frontiers of neuroscience and the depths of his own psyche, and the most profound answer he found was growing quietly at his feet all along. The answer is not a statement. It is a relationship with the mystery of being here, conscious, alive, and participatory. The story of changing your mind is finally the story of coming home, but coming home to find your home has been transformed. The furniture is the same, but the walls are gone. The sky is in your living room, the wind is in your kitchen. You are no longer a prisoner of the architecture. You are a dweller in the open air. You are the gardener of your own awareness, and the harvest is the quality of your attention in each moment. The journey ends where it began, with a question. But the question has changed. It is no longer, is this all there is? It becomes, how shall I meet this breath, this pain, this joy, this dying light? Now that I know it is all part of the same inseparable whole, the mind has been changed, not into something else, but back into what it always was, a process, a verb, a way of the universe knowing itself. You are that process, you are that verb. The door is not behind you. It is beneath your feet, in every step. The cage is not around you. It is a story you can choose moment by moment to stop telling. The final truth is simple, too simple for the grand narratives we prefer. Wake up, pay attention, be astonished, and tend to the garden you find yourself in. The key was always in your hand. You were just waiting for the courage to look down and see that your hand too was part of the mystery you sought to unlock. The door opens inward and outward, and in all directions at once. There is nowhere to go. You're already here, and here, if you allow it, is everything.